What if you knew you had in your power as a school board to do something that would perhaps matter the most when it came to creating healthy schools and positive educational outcomes for kids? So that's what we're going to talk about today, how you can nurture diverse schools through bold leadership. This has a lot of text on it, but it's an important slide. I'm trying to make the case for why diverse schools matter. And there's a lot of on-ramps here backed by research. And you can pick and choose among what would speak best to whatever audience you're presenting to. Because part of the work here is helping people understand why diverse schools should remain a goal, why racially and economically diverse schools should remain a goal. So one reason is because school integration helps equalize resources. School integration helps equalize resources. I was reading a beautiful book about the desegregation of West Charlotte High School. It's an oral history. It just came out last fall. I'm going to add to Josh's reading list. It's called Cotton and Character. And there was a quote in there that has stuck with me because it really illustrates the way that desegregation and equalizing resources are linked. It was a black graduate of West Charlotte High School, which was a segregated black high school. And he graduated the year before the school system desegregated. And he said, we had been waiting for years to get that gravel parking lot paved and some new material into our classrooms. And it took desegregation to do it. It took the arrival of the white kids to do it. Now, I don't know how much a paved parking lot matters in terms of educational outcomes, but at its heart, segregation is about stigma. And equalizing resources helps remove some of those stigmas. When you destigmatize schools, when you don't have schools that are labeled as either black schools or white schools, you also create a stronger community because people stop avoiding certain schools and funneling themselves into other schools. They stop making neighborhood decisions based on the schools that the neighborhoods are associated with. So it creates a stronger overall community. There are real academic benefits for all kids when it comes to school desegregation. And honestly, some of the research on this is coming from the corporate sector. Most jobs today require people to work in diverse teams. And if the first time they're coming and interacting with diverse people is in the workplace, that's when you spend upwards of $300 million a year on diversity training in the workforce. So these diverse teams, the research shows, when people come into the room with different perspectives on an issue or on a problem, they tend to come up with more creative solutions to it because they all have a different angle on it, a new angle, if you will. And they also, it's like mental gymnastics for the mind, being on a diverse team or being in a diverse classroom, because you're constantly trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes. I've heard a professor at Columbia call it mental gymnastics, like this perspective taking, the ability to try to understand another point of view. That is the essence of critical thinking, and that is what's nurtured in diverse classrooms. I think we would all agree that our society could use a little less racism and a little less prejudice. And one of the most important social outcomes from diverse schools is a reduction in bias and prejudice, especially if the kids are interacting at an early age. My daughter is in an intentionally diverse preschool in Richmond, and she was coloring the other day. She was coloring a picture of her teacher who's black, and then she had two little babies. One of her teachers, not this particular teacher, is pregnant, and so she's really into like this. I can't even field the questions at this point. They're so complex. But so she's drawing, and kids at her age, she just turned 4, are starting to categorize things. And this is where racial categories really get set. And once they're set, once they become really rigid, it becomes easy for kids to stereotype. But so she colors her teacher brown. Her teacher is black. And one of the babies is pink, and the other one is yellow. And I said, tell me about that picture, Posey. And she said, at first she said, this is my teacher, pointing to the taller brown figure on the paper. And then she said, this is me, pointing to the pink thing. It wasn't, it was like a blob. And then this is you, pointing to the yellow thing. And then she just totally reversed it. And she said, this is you, Mommy, pointing to the tall brown doll. And this is me, pointing to the pink thing. And this is Miss Monche, pointing to the yellow thing. And then she colored everything pink. And I felt good about that very confusing interaction because it meant that her categories were still flexible. Her racial categories were still flexible. She also has a friend in her class who is the spitting image of his dad. His name's DeMario. His dad's name is DeMario too, and he was one of my students at John Marshall High School. And DeMario has a picture in the classroom, and he says that the thing he most likes about his school is that it's a community. DeMario likes the community at his school. And I am so grateful that Posey and DeMario are in community together, forever bonded by Paw Patrol. Because I don't think our democracy can succeed without our kids being in community together. Posey is going to be a racial minority when she grows up. I think I forgot to tell you that my daughter's name is Posey. That's my daughter. So she will be in a racial minority when she grows up. And if she doesn't know how to stand alongside communities that are not her own, then she isn't going to be able to function. So this is the essence of why we should be working for diverse schools. And I'll come back to this slide when we talk about the politics involved. So how do we voluntarily achieve school diversity? There may be some school divisions in the state of Virginia who remain under court order to desegregate. I doubt they're active court orders. So right now, within the current political and legal climate, most of our efforts are going to be voluntary. We can achieve more school diversity through rezoning, redrawing our attendance boundaries, through a thoughtful use of school choice, and I'll talk more about what each of these things mean, and through some kind of coordination between school officials and housing officials. These two things, school and housing policy, are obviously very related, but the conversations often take place in silos. So school rezoning. There was a great piece that Vox put out last fall called We Can Draw Attendance Zones to Make Classrooms Less Segregated. Let's see. So I just want to show you this as a resource. So essentially, it's a database where you can put in your school division, and it will show you a map of your current attendance boundaries and your attendance boundaries. Oh, here it is. Hi. So it's a long piece, and it talks all about how school attendance boundaries work. There's beautiful maps if you keep scrolling down, and it also shows you where we are in terms of school segregation today. It's getting worse. And it is find your district. All right. Anybody want to offer up their district as something we should look at? Albemarle. Okay. Thanks, Albemarle. All right, so it's finding your district. And then if you scroll down, here's how it would play out in Albemarle County Public Schools. This 2013 data. So if everyone was assigned to the nearest elementary school, the darker purple area represents the percent Black or Hispanic students living in the area. If everybody was assigned to their nearest elementary school, this is what segregation would look like. Here's what the segregation by school zone would look like. And it says the first thing you notice about Albemarle is segregation between attendance zones. This is common where districts often have areas that are heavily Black and Hispanic and other areas that are more heavily white. But you can see in Albemarle that it might be possible to draw zones where you deconcentrated some of the Black and Hispanic students in the division. That's the point I want to show you, and I'm going to show it to you again with Richmond City, because that is where I live. And I'm going to talk about it from the lens of my elementary school, which was William Fox Elementary School in the Fan. This is from 1987, and I am on the far, hold on, this is my left and right thing, far left. If you could see my whole outfit, you would know that I was wearing a full-on Laura Ingalls Wilder ensemble. I thought I was Little House on the Prairie. So in 1987, William Fox was about 40% white, 60% black, and those numbers have been reversed. And I'm talking about a couple of different student assignment policies that have contributed to that reversal, because over the entire time period, white students have made up about 10% of the division's enrollment overall. So for Fox to go from 40% white, which was already an overrepresentation, to more than 60% white, something must be going on. This map shows you a number of things. This is the transfer status of elementary school kids by the percentage of white residents living in the zone. And it's based on 2011 data. The data from this actually came from a rezoning process that the city of Richmond was going through or preparing to go through in 2011. And one of the things that you need to think about if you're going to rezone is what kind of data you need to make the best decisions about it. So one takeaway here is that Richmond City is very residentially segregated. White families are concentrated on the western part of the city. Another takeaway is related to the elementary school zone. So there's an open enrollment and policy in Richmond City. A lot of cities have these open enrollment policies. By 2011, because of fiscal cuts during the Great Recession, transportation for open enrollment had been eliminated. So some people call this the perfect storm of segregation. You've got families who are able to choose any school they want to, provided they can get their kid to the school with their own transportation, and you've got attendance zones that do nothing to counteract the residential segregation in Richmond. So the green in the element in the pies, the green represents the share of transfer students. So another takeaway from the map is that schools in heavily white neighborhoods have higher rates of transfer students, higher percentages of transfer students, including William Fox, which is right there in the middle. I was a transfer student from Churchill. There was a carpool of white kids from Churchill that drove over to Fox every morning, and somebody picked us up and drove us home too. But families, middle-class families, both black and white in the city, disproportionately use the open enrollment to get their kids into these predominantly white, wealthier neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods also had space. They had capacity. William Fox, 50% of its enrollment was based on transfer students. So when the rezoning occurred, one of the goals was to get more, quote-unquote, neighborhood kids into William Fox Elementary School. No more open enrollment, more neighborhood kids. So this is what's at stake with the lines. You still have the percentage white underneath all of those mismatched lines. I'm going to give you the numbers that go with it in a second. But there were all of these machinations. The board turned over in between some of the rezoning, and ultimately there were about 3 elementary school rezonings in a couple of years, and this speaks to the politics involved. And you can see that some of the most contested lines, which you can tell are contested if you've got green, blue, and black all kind of overlying at the same time, because those are where the changes occurred. Some of the most contested boundaries were around the white neighborhoods. So the numerical impact by school, these are the schools that were most impacted. For reference, white 8th grade or white students in public or private school, grades 1 through 8, is about 17% in Richmond City. On the south side of the river, the Blackwell Elementary Zone went from 28% white under the old boundaries to 0% white under the new boundaries. Westover Hills went from 14% white to 56% white, also on the south side. The zone, the elementary school that we're zoned for, that Posey will go to, went from 61% white to 16% white. Fox Zone remained 77% white, but they grabbed a whole bunch of the Museum District kids, and they no longer have room for open enrollment. They're at like 118% capacity. They've got trailers out back. And Mumford Elementary Zone remains 97% white in a city school system that is 10% white. So let's talk politics. Because if you're going to do this, if you're going to do the rezoning, you've got to think about the politics. Part of it goes back to how you're going to make the case to that first slide, how you're going to make the case for diverse schools. What's at stake, in part, is that the attendance boundaries shape the real estate markets. And you'll hear parents or families, even if they don't have kids, say, my property values are going to go down. Or I bought my house, if they do have kids, I bought my house because it is associated with this school, as though the lines are set in stone, as though they never change. Zillow, and I am addicted, I confess, and any other real estate app, they don't help. Some people are calling this educational redlining because it is very easy. It's a couple of clicks to look at a house that you're interested in, find the school that's affiliated with it, get the rating of the school, which is entirely based on test performance, which is a reflection of kids' opportunities before they come to school more than it is about what the schools are doing. And red is bad. I was looking in my neighborhood, the house I grew up in. The schools affiliated with it are all coded red instead of green. And I can also click to see what the attendance boundary is. So I know just where I have to move to get over the line and into a different zone. I can also get the racial makeup of the school. It's illegal to talk about the racial makeup of a neighborhood, but people use the school as a proxy. So the link between school and housing policy is very clear here, and it's also part of what's at stake with the rezoning. But I think if you're going to do it, you have to put this on a moral playing field. You have to talk about our common humanity. And I go back to a series of sermons that Dr. King gave. It was just the 50th anniversary of his assassination. A series of sermons that he gave in 1962 at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. It was about the levels of love. And I'm obviously not anywhere as articulate as he is. But he talked about utilitarian love. That's the first level. That's transactional love. I love you because you can do something for me. Then he talked about romantic love, which he said was a beautiful thing, but often limited to two people. Then he talked about a mother's love, which was an even higher level of love than romantic love, but that it could still be a selfish love because the mother might put the interest of her child above the interest of anybody else's child. And so he said what we should strive for was agape love, and I may be butchering the pronunciation. I didn't take Latin. He says agape love is spontaneous, it's all-inclusive, and it seeks nothing in return. All-inclusive and seeks nothing in return. The greatness of it is that you love every man, not for your sake, but for his sake. So that's what we need to be aspiring to. If it's good for your kid, it's good for my kid. What would we do if every child was my child? Those are the questions you want your stakeholders to be thinking about. So I've studied rezoning across a number of different school divisions and school districts around the country. And these are in no particular order, although I would say that goal setting is probably the first order of business. But here are some things that cut through the politics. Number one, you've got to set a goal. You've got to say diversity is a priority in this process. It doesn't have to be the only priority. You can still have proximity. You can still talk about stability. You can still talk about having the siblings going to the same school. But diversity has to be in there somewhere. And you've got to do some community education about why that's the case. That goes back to the first slide. You need to be transparent. If that means bringing in an external consultant to help so it looks like a sort of a balanced and fair thing, then do that. But the more people know, the better. Don't do it in secret. Figure out what data is going to help you tell your story. The maps are really helpful, often helping people see how segregated the district is right now is a starting point, and then what the possibilities for diversity are under different scenarios. Story helps. People pay attention to stories. They remember them. Tell a compelling story to help make the case for nurturing diverse schools. Student voice, I think it's very easy to see right now just how powerful student voice can be. Often when I teach pre-service teachers, and they're young, they're like 21, and we talk about issues of segregation, they remember rezoning processes from high school. And they remember being angry about them. They could sense that it wasn't fair. They could sense that there were dividing lines and that some students were privileged over others. So bringing students into the process, putting them on the committee, can help. They're better at adults when it comes to fairness, better than adults. talk to your media. Don't let them just cover it without you giving them your take on it, why you're doing it. They need to understand the rationale. Strong, ethical, agape leadership. And talking about not just the way education benefits individual kids, but also the collective goals of education. Education for creating good citizens. It's really hard to do that in a system of segregated schools. All right, the other thing you can do is just say, what if we forgot about these boundary lines altogether? People get so worked up about them. In fact, I know of a school division, I don't think it was in Virginia, a school district that because the brouhaha around rezoning had gotten so bad, they put on their website, don't buy a house based on the school attendance zone that it's associated with because our boundaries change all the time. Like they just were really upfront. These lines are not set in stone. But school choice helps you move away from boundary lines because it breaks the link between where you live and where you go to school. But I'm not talking any kind of school choice. How you structure school choice, how you design it, matters a whole lot. Because if you don't think about things, school choice can make segregation work. In the same way we saw that open enrollment in Richmond made segregation worse, you have got to put civil rights protections around school choice. Okay, so the first thing you do with a school of choice, and I'm studying a bunch of schools right now, ECOF is actually one of them, is that you put in some kind of theme or attractive programming. Posey School is a Reggio school. I didn't even know what that was. ECOF has the SEL, the social emotional learning. I'm looking at an arts program in the city, and Code RVA, this computer science, something that's going to bring families in because they're attracted to the program. You have got to let people know about the school choice. If they don't know about a choice, they can't make it. So really extensive and targeted outreach to make sure people know about it. Diversity goals is not going to happen by accident. Put diversity goals around the school enrollment. You want it to roughly reflect the city, or you want it to roughly reflect the school division. Lottery-based admissions, don't put any criteria in there. That's a barrier for kids. Lottery-based admissions, and if you're worried that your outreach isn't going to reach everybody, then make it a weighted lottery. So even if your pool doesn't reflect your school division, your school still can. You got to offer transportation. It's not a real choice if you can't get to it. And all students in the school have to gain access to the programming. I haven't talked anything about segregation within schools, but that happens too. That's the next step once you get the kids in the building together. So making sure that if you put an IB program in the school, you don't have just a certain set of kids accessing the IB program. That's segregation within the school. You can go one step further. And instead of focusing on individual schools and sort of a piecemeal plan to try to nurture schools or nurture diverse schools one setting at a time, you can go to a system of controlled choice. So every school in your school division participates in this system. Families rank their choices, they submit them to the school division, and the division makes the final assignment decision based on diversity, having an even balance of kids across the school, but also based on things like proximity or preference, making sure parents get their first or second choice. There are examples of this around the country, and it's really effective because it eliminates the haves and have-nots when you have a system of choice that doesn't reach every school. Everybody gets to participate. Here's what it looks like in practice. Another map. They're kind of blurry, so I apologize. This is Louisville, Jefferson County, Kentucky. Louisville, Jefferson County is a single city suburban school district. They have an assignment plan that tries to make sure that kids from different kinds of neighborhoods in Louisville go to school together. The underlying map is of neighborhood segregation in Louisville. You can see that the city remains highly segregated. And then the pies are elementary schools. Red represents the share of white students in the elementary school. Green represents the share of black students, yellow Latino, and purple Asian. What do you notice about the link between residential segregation in Louisville and school segregation? There isn't one. There isn't one. Even in segregated neighborhoods, the schools are diverse. And remember what I said about school desegregation, especially when it's broad and comprehensive, creating healthier communities? even though it's still bad, black-white residential segregation in the Louisville area is coming down twice as fast as it is in the Richmond area, in part because people don't make school decisions based on housing decisions any longer. So that leads me to my final point. Housing policy is school policy. It doesn't all have to be on you if you create the right partnerships. Unfortunately, most of the time we do these things separately. So this is the Richmond area. The red dots represent our high opportunity schools, schools with lots of resources attached to them. And there are overlaps with race and poverty. So these are schools that are less than 25% low income and less than 25% kids of color. Less than 25% Black and Hispanic. These are based on federal definitions. So the opportunity schools are the red dots. The low-income housing tax credits, the LIHTC credits, are the black dots. That's one of our major forms of federally subsidized housing. And then the percentage of units that are housing choice vouchers in a neighborhood are in the orange. So what do you notice about subsidized housing in Richmond and access to high opportunity schools, the red dots? They're not correlated. They're not close to one another. Currently, housing policy in the Richmond metro area isn't doing anything to give families who receive subsidized housing access to our highest opportunity schools. In Montgomery County, Maryland, I'm almost done, I promise, and I want lots of questions. In Montgomery County, Maryland, our nation's longest running inclusionary housing program has been in place since the early 1970s. So 15% of all new developments in Montgomery County, Maryland are set aside for subsidized housing. And the politics of that, teacher helped cut through them. An African-American teacher came to the board meeting where this policy was going to be decided, and she stood up and she said, "You're willing to let me teach your children all day, but you won't let me sit beside you and live beside you at night. Why is that?" So the inclusionary housing policy passed, and it set up a natural experiment because Montgomery County also has a number of high poverty schools that they have been willing to funnel additional resources to. So they funnel $2,000 more per student to the red zone schools, to the high poverty schools. And that money goes to just about every research-based educational intervention you can think of, including extended day kindergartens, tutoring, summer school. There's no naps anymore in the kindergarten. They're so focused on getting the kids learning. And then they have the green zone schools. So these are the low poverty schools that still serve significant shares of low-income children because of the housing policy. The kids are living in neighborhoods that are linked to the green zone high-opportunity schools. And these are the math scores over time, similar for reading. Over time, who's doing better, the kids benefiting from the housing policy or the kids benefiting from the extra educational resources? Housing policy. And by a lot towards the end of it. Notice, though, that it takes time. It takes time. Don't put a policy in place and expect things to change overnight, because you still have to work on what happens within the school. Integration is a long and continuous process, and it has to be monitored. If you do have the courage, the bold leadership required to nurture diverse schools, then you need to think about how you're going to measure success. And you do need to be patient. It takes time. And you're going to want to you're going to want to monitor the implementation within the schools. How diverse are the classrooms? Can you walk into an honors class or a special education class and tell where you are because of the racial makeup of the students? That's not the goal. You want integration down to the classrooms. You're going to monitor disparities in discipline, special education and gifted identification, whether or not the kids are interacting in extracurricular activities. That's one of the most natural places for kids to be working cooperatively toward a common goal. And you're going to want to make sure that the school leadership and the school teachers are also diverse. Lots of resources here. There's a report, it's a Richmond area report, but it gives you some ideas of the maps that you can create to start making the case for diverse schools. The National Coalition on School Diversity has a lot of policy and advocacy resources that summarize the research. There's a very searing episode of This American Life called The Problem That We All Live With. People, when they hear it, it makes the politics very real for them, but it makes the importance of why we need to be fighting against the politics also clear. And then the last thing is a manual on how to design school choice well. And it's available online too. Okay, you guys look fatigued. Anybody have questions? Do we have time for questions?
Based on your data, are you saying that as a result of today's zoning, that we have gone back to where we came from as far as school segregation?
Oh, thank you. That is part of it. We've lost a lot of the progress that we made after Brown. School zoning, the way that we're drawing attendance lines is part of it. Jesus. Which I didn't talk about today. But the boundary lines between cities and suburbs are part of it. School choice, when it's not designed well, is part of the reason we've seen a backslide. And ongoing residential segregation. Yes.
Do you have any data that would explain why the zoning, of course we know it's all political, but what's behind the rezoning structure that has taken us back those steps as far as segregation and desegregation in the school systems?
So I have some case studies, and the voices that tend to be the most active during the rezoning process are the most advantaged voices in your school division, and they often influence the outcomes. And so a good rezoning process reaches into lots of different corners of your school division and makes sure that a variety of voices are heard. Thank you for your questions.
You said rezoning as a solution to diversity, but if you living in a city where it's 91% black and all the schools are black, rezoning not going to help.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, if you live in a district that's 91% black, how is rezoning going to help? Well, I would again point you to Richmond. Richmond is 90% kids of color, 10% white. And yet we still have 3 schools that are over 50% white. So in a city, it would be hard to have full integration or comprehensive integration right away. But we could do better in Richmond. We could have more than 3 schools, one of which is over 90% white. We could have more diverse schools, starting with that magnet school concept and starting small. But the reason I didn't talk about school district boundary lines today is because it was going to be a whole nother conversation. Those lines, the lines between cities and suburbs, continue to segregate us today, and there are ways to cross them, but they require coordination across multiple school boards.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I noticed you didn't say anything about Chimborazo.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the homes there are now being brought and we're working on them. And the population is changing, am I correct?
So Chimborazo Elementary is up in Churchill, and Churchill is rapidly gentrifying. And again, these population shifts, the gentrification of cities and the non-white suburbanization of suburbs. Sorry, guys, late night, early morning with the busted face. But those metropolitan migrations create opportunities for more diverse schools. Chimborazo is sort of embracing this magnet concept. The elementary school has become a whole school IB program, so all the kids in the school are going to benefit from the IB programming. And they're, slowly but steadily, young white families who have settled in Churchill are opting into Chimborazo. That's not to say that it's without tensions within the school. I think there's a whole nother process of integration when it comes to what goes on inside of the buildings. And making sure that the kids are treated equally, that they're working together cooperatively towards common goals, that the leadership is supportive of the growing diversity. All of those things need to be in place for it to work really well. But it's certainly an opportunity.
In your research or experience, What have you found at the school board level in terms of being able to make these decisions and engage the community to be supportive of those decisions where there's been success?
Mm-hmm. It looks different in different places, but it has happened in different places. So that's the first thing to know, that I'm not just outlining this imaginary utopia. There's always courage. There's always brave leadership where it works. And there are people that are able to clarify the values that are at stake, and to bring people on board. And grassroots coalitions that are supporting you are also helpful, especially if they're interracial, bringing the faith community on board because of the moral dimension here. Having clear data so people know how bad the problem is and what they can do about it. And if you build choice into it, and choice gets thrown around in lots of different ways in education policy these days, but I'm talking about choice with civil rights protections. If you build choice into it, the politics aren't as bad.